I want to talk about a person who died long ago, but from whom I have learned. So this is a little bit of a self-indulgent sermon. I want to remember someone who might surprise you, Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin. And it's probably not going to be what you think. Rasputin is a figure who has always fascinated me, and I've made him into a lifetime study. You probably have heard of Rasputin. He was a 19th century Russian mystic and faith healer who worked his way into the court of Tsar Nicholas II, the last emperor of Imperial Russia. Now, at the time, Imperial Russia was in a bad way. The economy was bad, food was scarce, the World War I was not going well, and the government was corrupt. The Tsar's son, Alexei, had hemophilia, a bleeding disorder, and the medicine of that age was completely ineffective. But Rasputin's faith healing worked and kept the boy alive. This gave Rasputin standing in the imperial court, and he did influence politics in the final days before the Russian Revolution. And the aristocrats hated him because of that. Now, Rasputin is said to have been a libertine, a promiscuous man who seduced young women by the dozen. There are rumors of his debaucheries that are still recounted today, and no, I will not be recounting them here. And true enough, most of the surviving photographs of him show him surrounded by young women. The popular press portrayed Rasputin as an evil, almost mystically evil man who destroyed the Russian court through mind control, debauchery, and hypnotism, even seducing the empress. That is the image of Rasputin that history remembers. Lurid stories are told about him. You may have seen the first Hellboy movie, where Rasputin appears as an immortal, risen from the dead villain serving old gods that H.P. Lovecraft would have admired. Rasputin also showed up in the humorous action movie, The King's Man, where he is portrayed as a covert agent of an evil mastermind trying to influence the outcome of World War I. There is even a West German musical group called Boney M that created a catchy rock tune called Rah Rah Rasputin in 1978. And lately, this has been showing up on YouTube as the background for videos about Ukraine. You'll have no trouble finding it on YouTube if you look for it. One of the lyrics says, "Rah, rah, Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. It was a shame how he carried on." Finally, the Russian aristocracy had had enough, and they assassinated Rasputin. It didn't help. The Russian Revolution happened. The Tsar and his family were murdered by Russian revolutionists. While Rasputin did engage in affairs and drunken parties, he often spoke of love, kindness, and the beauty of nature, which he thought was proof that God loved humanity and gave us a beautiful world from that love. He taught that we all should appreciate the good things that the people we love bring into our lives, even if the relationship ultimately did not work out. So on this Sunday closest to Valentine's Day, I thought it would be fun to remember Rasputin despite his dark reputation, because everything he left us that he dictated was about love, not the bad stuff people accused him of. And that surprised me. But you know, we can learn a lot from things and people that surprise us. And I began to wonder what Rasputin actually believed, and if there was something there that I could learn. And I think there is. Now, this is being realized now by other people. There is actually a modern academic movement to rehabilitate and reconsider Rasputin's reputation and his role in history. In Slavic nations, Russia, Ukraine, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere, Rasputin has come to be honored as a spiritual man who was the patron of Slavic national identity because he protected the young Prince Alexei. You can actually buy religious icons of Rasputin these days. I have a collection. And there are Orthodox churches where his icon is prominently displayed before the altar. In 2004, there was a movement to formally canonize him and make him Saint Rasputin. It didn't happen because world events interfered, but I will not be surprised if Rasputin is elevated to sainthood within the Orthodox community during my lifetime. How's that for a surprise? Now, it's been said that reputation is about what others say about you, while character is about who you actually are. I'm speaking to Rasputin's character today, which is a good thing because his reputation stinks. Born on January 21st, 1869, in a Serbian village, Rasputin would grow to be a big man. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall. At the age of 19, he married his childhood sweetheart, Peskova Dubotnik, who adored him and remained his wife even after he moved away to assume a role with the Russian government. She would bear him 7 children, 3 of which lived, Maria, Varvara, and Dmitri. She died the same year he did, probably of a broken heart, today what we would call emotional cardiomyopathy. Keep in mind this long and successful marriage when you hear stories about Rasputin. He was assassinated by agents of the Russian aristocracy on December 30th, 1916, in St. Petersburg. The legend is that they poisoned him with pastry, but he didn't die. So they shot him in the head, and he didn't die. And so they threw his body in the river where he was to drown. However, the autopsy found water in his lungs, meaning he was still alive when he was thrown into the river. He was not actually killed by the gunshot, quite a testimony to his vitality. However, like most of the stories about Rasputin, this story is not true. His daughter Maria would write that her father ate only simple food: fruit, vegetables, fish, and bread. Any photos you might see of Rasputin surrounded by lavish food represented gifts from his admirers that he personally never touched. He hated sweets and would never have eaten the poison pastry. The actual autopsy report, which became available to scholars after the fall of the Soviet Union, showed that he died of the gunshot and no poison was found in his system. Now, I will not take up time to talk about the other sensationalistic things said about Rasputin. There are claims that he returned from the dead, that one of the organs of his body was severed and used in dark rituals. Guess which one? That his children came to form a secret society. And all of that is nonsense that you can debulk, that you can, with a few minutes with Google, you can prove that it is not true. all of that can be readily debunked. But at some time, Rasputin spent time training with a heretical branch of the Russian church who called themselves the Kalisti. They did not honor any sort of clergy and were organized as insular groups of people with communication between these groups maintained by messengers called flying angels. The Orthodox Church tried to suppress the Kalisti, but they maintained their faith underground, sometimes literally in basements and caves. The Kalisti practiced a form of worship they called rejoicing. It involved ecstatic dances and speaking in tongues and apparently group sex. Attendance was seldom a problem. However, as far as can be determined, scholars can find no evidence that Rasputin was ever formally a member of the Kalisti, although he may have had sympathy for some of their practices. The stories that are told about people often take on a life of their own, which pushes away truth. And that sort of exaggeration happened to Rasputin too. You probably have heard stories that he was a depraved man who seduced Alexandria, the Empress of Russia, but serious historians doubt all of that. Rasputin did hold salons, informal teaching gatherings in his home. And many aristocratic women attended because they had little else to do in that society, and it was fun to attend because of Rasputin's bad boy reputation. But there's no actual evidence of libertine practices or that he ever seduced the empress, although no one knows for sure. It was common in that society for aristocrats of both genders to have paramours and mistresses, so it just wasn't that big a deal back then. In reality, what we do know is that Rasputin converted to Orthodox Christianity and stayed in a monastery as a lay monk in 1897 when he was 28 years old. In Orthodox Christianity, religious professionals below the rank of bishop can be married, and laity always can. Rasputin became a starets. A starret is not a priest. They're not ordained at all, but they are religious workers. Probably the closest equivalent we have in our culture would be a spiritual director. A spiritual director is a person who helps guide people to deepen their spiritual lives. Another parallel would be someone in our society who was known as a spiritual practitioner. Some of the more popular teachers of the Course in Miracles, or a famous motivational speaker like Tony Robbins. He was that sort of person. And apparently he was really good in this role and soon became very popular because of his beliefs, despite his peasant upbringings and mannerisms. His table manners were awful. He only ate with his fingers, and he never used a napkin. Rasputin was an imposing man of powerful charisma who became known as a spiritual healer, and that is what brought him to the attention of the Tsar. The royal prince Alexei, suffering from hemophilia, had a problem because his blood would not clot properly. He could bleed out. This condition was frequently fatal. And somehow, Rasputin was able to help the boy. We don't know his method of healing, but what is said of it sounds a lot to me like medical hypnotism, and it appears he often based his patter in such sessions on nature, nature's beauty, and the transformative and healing power of love, even temporary love. You can probably figure out now why I find Rasputin of interest. I am a religious professional myself and also a hypnotist, although I'm shorter and bald, but you can't have everything. In fact, hypnotism was a common study among the Orthodox clergy at the time, so it is likely that is what Rasputin learned. There has even been hypothesized there may be some sort of connection between Rasputin and a man known as Rexford North, who was the founder of the National Guild of Hypnotists, the oldest and largest hypnosis organization in the world, an organization of which I am an officer. Rexford North disappeared mysteriously, just overnight. Historians now know that was not his real name. He was Russian, and one theory is that the Russian communist government hunted him down because they did that to anyone that they could find who had been connected to the Russian imperial court. Rasputin used his influence with the royal family to get them to do things powerful people didn't like. The common story is that the aristocrats thought Rasputin had too much influence over the Tsar, and that was causing the war to go badly. But historians actually believe he didn't have that kind of influence. The Tsar was making bad decisions all by himself. But when the Tsar went to the front lines and left the Empress in charge of the government, Rasputin did have influence over her, and she began to advocate for social reforms. The aristocracy didn't like that. Rasputin, of peasant stock, became a regular advocate for the poor. He would rage that it was sin, that there was corn rotting in the imperial warehouses because the people could not afford the prices that the aristocrats wanted to charge. And one of the surest ways to get on the bad side of someone who is rich and powerful is to tell them they need to be less rich and less powerful. But that is precisely what Rasputin had the Empress do. He would also seek to help anyone who he thought was getting a raw deal in that society. He had a pad of notes that said, "Please help the person who bears this note." And he would sign it with a little cross under his name. And his stature with the common people was so great that that help would typically be given. Now, he knew that he could not single-handedly alter the Russian economy or system, but where he could put influence, he did. I've often thought that Rasputin would have agreed with the Reverend Edward Everett Hale, a Unitarian minister during the Civil War, who said words that I find inspiring myself. Hale said, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse the something that I can do." Rasputin always tried to do the something that he could do. He persuaded the Tsar to discontinue the conventional medical treatments the physicians were giving Prince Alexei. And a good thing, too, because we now know those treatments were at best ineffective and quite likely toxic. The boy simply may have gotten better simply because those treatments stopped. And Rasputin was able to get the boy to be calm, and that allowed the natural healing in his system to take over. In short, he was an earthy and compassionate man. Tsar Nicholas II would write that Rasputin was a good, simple, religious Russian man. In moments of doubt and spiritual torment, I love to converse with him, and after such conversations, my soul is always light and calm. The Tsar would also write, "Better 10 Rasputins than one of the Empress's hysterical fits." Apparently, the Tsar thought his wife was something of a piece of work. So there you have the first, second, third, and fourth thing that Rasputin believed. First, the rich have an obligation to help the poor. Second, that we should all do whatever we can to help others, even if we can't completely fix the problem. Third, natural healing is often best, and soothing away emotional pain, often the finest medicine. Fourth, the world is really beautiful, and people we love and who love us give us incredible emotional gifts that we often carelessly overlook. And I'll give an unqualified yay saying to all four of those beliefs. Now, all of us will, at times in our life, face problems that defy solution. We can't get the damn computer to work. No matter how we try, the relationship fails. We really thought this was the right job, but it just isn't fulfilling, and we don't know what to do. We may encounter a temptation we can't resist, even though we know nothing good will come of it. We're stuck, and we don't know how to proceed. Well, Rasputin believed that a way to address these things was to try to do more of them until you got sick of it. He believed you needed to get over yourself and find a better way. This is how he taught people to get over inappropriate romantic and physical attraction. Simply give into those urges, he said, and that's the reason for his sensational reputation. But the basic idea is that if you can't figure out how to achieve something, you can reset your thinking so new ideas can flow. And this is the fifth thing that Rasputin believed, although I will suggest a different method. Rasputin's core idea was to free yourself from temptation to sin by engaging in more of the sin until it lost its hold on you. Now that probably sounds a little odd, but one of the techniques used by therapists today is called implosion. For example, if they want to help you stop smoking, they may require you to first smoke 3 times as much. After you've done that for a while, you're so sick of nicotine poisoning, tobacco loses its hold on you. Got a problem eating ice cream? Try living on nothing else for 2 months and see how you feel about it then. That's implosion. Rasputin believed you could free yourself from sin and temptation in the same way. Do a lot of it, and it will lose its hold on you. He called such experiences purifications and believed that once the intensity of the thing you thought was important faded with repetition, you could see a different way more clearly. You could reset the brain. Now, I'm not going to recommend this particular Rasputin teaching, although it does sound like fun. But I do think finding a way to break through self-defeating habits and looking for new solutions is valid. I use a principle from ancient philosophy. The principle comes from Stoic philosophy. It's called the obstacle is the way. First expressed by Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest emperors of ancient Rome. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What he meant by this is that when you confront something in your life that brings your progress, goals, or your dreams to a halt, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing because discovering that something doesn't work is a valuable piece of information, and it serves to point the way to correction. And that correction can come in 2 forms. First, you might figure out a different way to achieve your goal if you give up doing more of what isn't working. Or second, you might discover you really don't want that goal as much as you thought you did. Clement Stone, one of the richest people in America and a friend to the late President Ronald Reagan, and someone I've met personally, by the way, said in a book, "Got a problem? That's good." It's good because perhaps the problem will help you find a way around the problem instead of just doing more of what isn't working. So I think a far better way is to realize that often our obstacles show us the way instead. Either we find a different path or we find a different goal. So what Rasputin believed? 5 things. First, if you're well off, you should use some of your resources to help others. Be compassionate. Second, do what you can to help others, even if there's a limit to what you can do as a solitary person. Third, natural healing is often best, and soothing away emotional problems often the best therapy. Fourth, we actually live in a beautiful world that we carelessly do not notice. We should notice it, and we should notice the good things that the people we love and who love us bring into our lives, and there's a teaching for Valentine's Day. Fifth, when you don't know what to do, find some way to reset your thinking rather than doing more of what isn't working. While implosion might work sometimes, it's better to find a different way to your goal or decide you need a different goal completely. The obstacle can be the way. Not bad ideas from the mind of a man who was not himself bad, but who had a really bad reputation. And so I remember him, and I hope you find his counsel of interest. And that's my sermon.
Visit us at uusg.org.